It started innocently enough, a shared laugh over dinner, a lingering glance across the room. But when Alex looked at me like no one else ever had, I should have known it would lead to ruin. The evening began as most did in our quiet suburban home. Ethan and his best friend, Alex, lounging on the couch while I bustled around the kitchen, pretending it wasn't just the three of us rattling around this big house. Dinner was simple spaghetti and garlic bread, but their laughter filled the spaces between conversations, making it feel almost warm again. Almost. After dessert, Ethan disappeared upstairs to play video games, leaving Alex behind to help clear the table. "You don't have to do that," I said, though secretly I was glad for the company. "It's fine," he replied with an easy grin, stacking plates like he'd done it 1,000 times before. His movements were deliberate, careful, not what I expected from someone so young. As we worked side by side, I noticed how much he'd changed since I last paid attention. Gone was the reckless teenager who used to raid my fridge after school. In his place stood someone older, quieter, weighed down by something I couldn't quite name. We ended up sitting at the counter once everything was cleaned, sipping tea and talking about nothing and everything. He told me about his latest foster family, glossing over details but letting slip enough to make my chest ache. There was a sadness in him, buried beneath layers of charm and bravado, that pulled at me in ways I didn't understand. And then there were the looks, the way his eyes lingered on mine just a beat too long, searching for something I wasn't sure I could give. By the time Ethan finally called out a sleepy goodnight from the top of the stairs, Alex and I had been chatting for hours. When he finally stood to leave, brushing crumbs off his shirt, he paused near the doorway. "Thanks for tonight," he said softly, meeting my gaze. For a moment, neither of us moved, the air thick with unspoken words. Then he turned away, leaving me alone with thoughts I couldn't untangle. That's when I realized it wasn't going to be that easy to forget the way he looked at me, or the way it made me feel. Over the next few weeks, Alex started showing up at the house more often. "Just need a break from the chaos," he'd say with a shrug, settling into the kitchen chair like he belonged there. At first, I told myself it was harmless. He was Ethan's best friend, practically family. But as the days turned into evenings spent talking long after Ethan had gone to bed, something shifted between us. He spoke about his life in fragments, hinting at a childhood that sounded more like survival than living. Foster homes, relatives who didn't want him, parents who disappeared. All of it painted a picture of someone carrying wounds far deeper than his easy smile let on. And then there were the moments when he'd turn the conversation back to me. "What was he like?" he asked one night, nodding toward the photo of my late husband on the mantel. His voice was soft, almost reverent, and for the first time in years, I found myself opening up, not just about James, but about the loneliness that had settled in since losing him. We stayed up late, sharing pieces of ourselves that felt too heavy to carry alone. There was a comfort in those conversations, a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been craving. But beneath that comfort lurked something else, something electric and dangerous. The way Alex looked at me sometimes, like I was the only person in the room, made my chest tighten. He wasn't just seeing me, he was understanding me in ways no one else had bothered to try. I tried to push the feelings aside, reminding myself of the boundaries we were supposed to keep. Family, practically family. But Alex saw right through my defenses. One evening, as we sat side by side on the couch, he leaned closer, his hand brushing mine. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said quietly. "I see how lonely you are." His words hit their mark, sharp and true. I pulled away, standing abruptly to put distance between us. "Don't," I murmured, though my voice lacked conviction. This isn't okay." But even as I said it, I couldn't ignore the pull, the unspoken connection growing stronger with every passing day. It terrified me, not because I didn't feel it, but because I did, too much. And Alex, he didn't seem willing to let me hide anymore. The rain tapped steadily against the windows that night, a rhythmic patter that seemed to echo the unease growing inside me. Ethan had gone to bed hours ago, leaving Alex and me alone in the dim glow of the living room. We'd been talking about nothing important, really, but the air between us felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. Then, out of nowhere, Alex turned to me, his expression raw and unguarded. "I know this is wrong," he began, his voice trembling but resolute, "but I can't stop thinking about you." My breath caught in my throat. The words hung there, suspended in the thick silence, as if daring me to respond. My first instinct was to laugh it off, to tell him he didn't know what he was saying. But when I looked into his eyes, so earnest, so full of longing, I couldn't dismiss it so easily. Guilt twisted in my chest, sharp and suffocating, but beneath it lay something else, a flicker of desire I hadn't felt in years. "Alex, no," I said firmly, shaking my head. "This we can't. You're Ethan's best friend. You're practically family." He flinched at my words, but didn't back down. "I don't care about any of that," he said softly. "All I know is how I feel, and I think you feel it too." I wanted to deny it, to shut him down completely, but the truth lodged itself in my chest like a splinter I couldn't remove. Instead, I stood abruptly, putting distance between us. "You need to go," I said, my voice shaky. "Now." He left without another word, but his confession lingered long after he was gone, haunting me like a ghost I couldn't escape. Days passed before he came by again, under the pretense of checking on Ethan. We ended up alone in the kitchen after another late-night conversation, the same electric tension crackling between us. Before I could process what was happening, Alex stepped closer, his hand brushing mine. Then, suddenly, he leaned in and kissed me, a brief, impulsive press of lips that sent a jolt through me. I pulled away instantly, my heart pounding. "What are you doing?" I whispered, horrified by what we'd just done. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, his cheeks flushed. "I couldn't help it." His apology should have been enough to end it right then. But instead, the kiss ignited something neither of us could ignore, a spark that refused to fade. From that moment on, our relationship became a dangerous dance of push and pull, each encounter blurring the line between wrong and irresistible. The guilt was a living thing, coiled tight in my chest, whispering cruel truths I couldn't silence. What was I doing? Alex wasn't just some stranger. He was Ethan's best friend, practically family. He was barely 19, still figuring out who he was, while I was twice his age, a widow trying to hold together the remnants of a life that had fallen apart years ago. And yet, every time he looked at me with those searching eyes, every time his hand brushed mine or his voice softened when he said my name, I felt something awaken inside me, something I buried deep after James died. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I told myself over and over that it was wrong, so wrong. Acting on these feelings would destroy everything. Ethan's trust, the fragile stability we'd built as a family, even the image I'd worked so hard to maintain in our quiet suburban neighborhood. But no matter how many times I repeated those words in my head, they didn't drown out the pull I felt toward Alex, the way he made me feel seen again, alive in a way I hadn't been in years. His presence filled the loneliness I'd tried to ignore, replacing it with an electric mix of comfort and danger that left me breathless and ashamed all at once. Alex, too, seemed caught in the storm we'd created. One moment, he'd be sitting across from me, his expression soft and open, talking about how much he needed someone who understood him. The next, he'd retreat into himself, his jaw tightening as if bracing for rejection. "I don't want to hurt Ethan," he admitted one night, his voice low and strained. We were sitting on the porch, the cool air wrapping around us like a shroud. "He's like a brother to me, but I can't stop thinking about you." His confession hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't fair to any of us. Alex carried scars from a life I could barely imagine. Foster homes where he never quite belonged, parents who abandoned him, relationships that ended before they began because he was too broken to let anyone get close. Stability was foreign to him, affection even more so. And now here I was offering both, even though I knew better. But what did knowing better even mean anymore? Every instinct screamed at me to end it, to push him away, and lock down whatever this was before it consumed us completely. Yet when I looked at him, really looked at him, I saw the same conflict reflected back at me. He wanted to run, that much was clear. Running was what he did best. But there was something else beneath the surface, something raw and desperate. For the first time, maybe ever, he wasn't running. He was staying, fighting for something he thought might save him. And I hated myself for wanting to let him. This is going to ruin everything. I whispered finally, more to myself than to him. My hands trembled where they rested on my knees, and I clenched them into fists to steady them. I know, Alex said softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. But I don't think I care. His honesty terrified me, not because it was reckless, but because it mirrored my own thoughts. If we kept going, we'd lose everything. But stopping felt impossible, like trying to turn back once you're halfway across a rickety bridge. The fall would kill you either way. The pull between us became impossible to ignore. What started as lingering glances and loaded silences turned into stolen moments we couldn't justify, but couldn't resist. It began innocently enough, or as innocent as something like this could be. A quick meeting in an empty parking lot late at night, under the pretense of Alex grabbing coffee before heading home. Then came the whispered phone calls after Ethan went to bed, his voice low and urgent on the other end of the line. I just needed to hear your voice, he'd say, and I'd let myself believe it was harmless. Just words, just comfort. But then there were the hurried encounters, brushes of hands when no one was looking, a kiss pressed against my temple while Ethan was distracted by a video game upstairs. Each moment felt electric, intoxicating, yet laced with danger. We told ourselves it was manageable, that we could keep it hidden. But every secret meeting only deepened our connection and heightened the stakes. The more time we spent together, the harder it became to imagine stopping. It wasn't long before things took a darker turn. One evening, Alex showed up at the house visibly shaken, clutching his phone like it might burn him. "Someone sent me this," he said, shoving the screen toward me. My stomach dropped as I read the message. Asterisk, pay up, or everyone finds out about you and her. Asterisk, what does it mean? I asked, though dread pooled heavy in my chest. I don't know, Alex muttered, running a hand through his hair. At first, I thought it was some prank from one of my old friends messing around. But now, his voice trailed off, his jaw tightening. We both tried to dismiss it, convincing ourselves it was nothing, a cruel joke, maybe even a misunderstanding. But the messages didn't stop. They escalated, growing more specific and menacing. "You can't hide forever," read another text. And then came the photos, grainy images of Alex and me together, taken without our knowledge. Us walking side by side in public, us sitting close in my car, us laughing over coffee. Someone had been watching us, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. When those photos appeared online, with captions hinting at scandal, it felt like the ground beneath us crumbled away. Panic surged through me as I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. "This is real," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "They're really going to expose us." Alex's face hardened, his usual bravado replaced by raw fear. "Whoever it is, they're not playing games anymore," he said grimly. And if Ethan sees this, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The thought of Ethan finding out, the betrayal, the heartbreak was unbearable. Yet here we were, trapped in a web of our own making, with no clear way out. Every new message tightened the noose around us, forcing us to confront the reality of what we'd done. Our affair had always been dangerous, but now it wasn't just our hearts at risk. It was everything. The blackmail brought everything crashing down around us. Alex's past, which he'd always kept shrouded in vague half-truths, came roaring back with a vengeance. It turned out the mysterious stranger wasn't just some random person. They were an old friend from one of Alex's foster homes, someone who claimed Alex owed them money from a deal gone wrong years ago. Except it wasn't just about money anymore. This person wanted revenge for being left behind, for debts unpaid, for scars that never healed. They're dangerous, Alex admitted one night, his voice low and strained as we sat huddled in my car on the edge of town. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. I thought I could outrun this, but he trailed off, shaking his head. I didn't think they'd go this far. What do they want? I asked, though deep down I already knew. The photos online had been just the beginning, a taste of what they were capable of. They want me to pay up or face the consequences, he said bitterly. But it's not just about cash. They want to ruin me, expose everything. Everything included us. And as if on cue, the rumors began spreading through our tight-knit community like wildfire. Whispers at the grocery store, sideways glances at school events. People talked, speculating about the widow and her son's best friend. My stomach churned every time I overheard fragments of conversation or caught someone staring a little too long. How much did they know? How long before Ethan found out? Ethan noticed the changes almost immediately. At first, it was subtle. He'd frown when Alex showed up late, or raise an eyebrow when I seemed distracted during dinner. But soon, his suspicions grew into something sharper, more pointed. One evening, after Alex stormed out following another heated argument, Ethan cornered him in the driveway. "What's going on with you?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharp with frustration. "You've been acting weird for weeks. And Mom, she's different too. Is something happening?" Alex hesitated, his jaw tightening as he glanced toward the house where I stood watching from the doorway. "Nothing's happening," he said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. "Don't lie to me," Ethan shot back, stepping closer. "You're lying. Both of you are. I can feel it." "It's complicated," Alex muttered, avoiding his gaze. "Complicated." Ethan laughed bitterly. "No, what's complicated is you treating me like I'm stupid. Like I don't see how things have changed between you two." Alex froze, his expression flickering with guilt. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan shook his head, disgust written across his face. "Unbelievable," he spat. "You're unbelievable." Before Alex could respond, Ethan turned and walked away, leaving him standing there alone. That fight fractured their friendship, and it terrified me. As the pressure mounted, I started questioning whether this affair was worth the destruction it was causing. Late one night, I confronted Alex in the kitchen, my voice trembling with desperation. "We need to end this," I said firmly, "for Ethan, for all of us." "No," Alex replied instantly, his eyes blazing with defiance. "I'm not giving up on us. Not now. But look at what's happening." I cried, gesturing wildly. "Our lives are falling apart because of this. Ethan hates you. Everyone's talking. Do you really think we can survive this?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Because I love you. Because it's real. If we let fear dictate our choices, then we'll lose everything." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Love, fear, survival, all tangled together in a mess I didn't know how to untangle. But even as I looked at him, I couldn't ignore the chaos swirling around us, or the growing certainty that no matter what we chose, someone would get hurt. It happened on a rainy evening, the kind where the world outside feels muted and distant. Ethan had come home early, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by an uncharacteristic tension that made my stomach churn. At first, I thought it was just teenage moodiness, until I saw the look in his eyes. He stormed into the living room, holding up his phone like it was evidence of some unspeakable crime. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling with rage. On the screen was one of those photos, the ones Alex and I had hoped would disappear as quickly as they'd appeared online. My heart sank. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, let alone speak. Behind Ethan, Alex stood frozen in the doorway, his face pale and stricken. "Ethan," I began, but my voice cracked under the weight of guilt. "How could you?" Ethan shouted, turning to me, tears streaming down his face. "You're my mom. And him, he's supposed to be my best friend." His words hit me like punches, each one landing harder than the last. Betrayal radiated off him in waves, raw and devastating. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I stammered, reaching out toward him, but he recoiled as if my touch might burn him. "You ruined everything," he spat, his voice breaking. "Everything we had. You threw it all away." Before I could respond, Alex stepped forward, his expression resolute despite the storm brewing around us. "It's not her fault," he said firmly, drawing Ethan's furious gaze. "I started it. I pursued her. She tried to stop me, but I wouldn't listen." The room fell silent except for the sound of rain pelting the windows. Ethan stared at Alex, disbelief etched across his features. "Why?" he whispered, his anger giving way to hurt. "How could you do this to me?" Alex hesitated, his jaw tightening as he struggled to find the right words. "I know I messed up," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can't regret how I feel about your mom. She's the only person who's ever truly understood me, the only one who's made me feel alive." His confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ethan looked between us, his chest heaving as he processed what he'd heard. Finally, he shook his head, backing away as if trying to distance himself from the wreckage. "I don't even know you anymore," he said, his voice hollow. Then, without another word, he turned and ran upstairs, slamming his bedroom door behind him. The silence that followed was unbearable. Alex and I stood there, the enormity of what we'd done pressing down on us like a physical weight. "We have to fix this," I said finally, though I wasn't sure where to start. "We can't," Alex replied, his tone resigned. "Not now. Maybe not ever." Just as we were grappling with the fallout, the mysterious stranger resurfaced with a twist neither of us saw coming. A letter arrived addressed to Alex, its contents shocking enough to leave him reeling. The blackmailer wasn't after money. They were Alex's biological parent, someone he'd never known existed until now. They claimed they'd abandoned him as a child out of desperation, only to spend years consumed by regret. Now, they wanted revenge, not for the blackmail itself, but for Alex's refusal to acknowledge them when they'd reached out years ago. "This changes everything," Alex muttered, clutching the letter and shaking hands. Who am I really? Was anything I thought I knew about myself even true? For the first time, I saw the cracks in Alex's armor, the vulnerability beneath his bravado. It terrified me because it mirrored my own fractured sense of self. We were both lost, searching for something we weren't sure we'd ever find. The story ends ambiguously, with Emily staring out the window late at night, clutching a second letter from Alex. In it, he writes about leaving town to confront his past and figure out who he truly is. He asks her to wait for him, to believe that maybe someday they can rebuild what they've broken. But as she stares out at the darkened street, her expression gives nothing away. Will she hold on to hope? Or will the weight of their choices tear them apart forever? The answer remains unwritten, suspended like the raindrops clinging to the glass. Throughout this tangled mess, I've asked myself over and over, can love like ours exist outside the boundaries society sets, or is it doomed from the start? Alex and I crossed a line that wasn't just forbidden, it was dangerous. And yet, in those fleeting moments together, it felt real, pure, even. But purity doesn't erase consequences. Love might transcend norms for a while, but eventually reality comes crashing down, taking relationships, trust, and lives with it. Balancing desire with responsibility has been my greatest struggle. As a mother, as someone who once valued loyalty above all else, I failed Ethan. I failed myself. My feelings for Alex weren't just about him. They were about filling a void left by grief, loneliness, and years of feeling invisible. But giving in to those desires came at a cost. Betrayal so deep it fractured everything I held dear. Forgiveness feels impossible now. Trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight, especially when it's shattered into pieces too small to hold. Yet, part of me wonders if redemption is still possible, not through excuses or denial, but through honesty. Maybe forgiveness starts not with others, but with ourselves. If we can face what we've done, truly own it, maybe there's hope for healing. Or maybe some wounds cut too deep to ever fully close. Either way, I know one thing for sure. Love like ours leaves scars that never fade, no matter how hard you try to outrun them.